Hey folks, this is Tolly and welcome to some more game dev. We're coming back here with Stagger Meter Part 3. Last time we left off, we had built a pretty rudimentary system, kind of quickly prototyped this idea of adding kind of a stagger mechanic system to our combat. And we got that mostly working. So if I hit this enemy with a basic slash, this meter fills a little bit. If I hit them with slash again, it fills a little bit more. And if I hit them a third time, they become staggered for 10 turns. And then I can perform a bash ability, and that bash ability does increase damage versus that enemy. So that's mostly working at this point. There are some major pieces that I'd still like to continue to prototype. So we're going to be taking a look at some of that stuff today. The main one is I'd like to make it so that the different enemies can have different reactions to different attacks. So if you have a slime, we might want to make it so the slime reacts normal across everything. But for the boar, we might want to make it so the parry ability has a much higher stagger effect. So certain enemies can be staggered in different ways or have unique behaviors that they prefer, or that the player would prefer to be doing in order to get them staggered more quickly. So we're going to kind of just jump back into that, or jump back into things and just work from there. I think the first thing I need to look at is, do our abilities already have a differentiator, some way of telling that this is the slash ability versus anything else that is like generic. I think this ability type component should do what we need. Yeah, so each ability has essentially a type associated with it, which is low, middle, high, or special, which is something we were using when we were doing more of a combo type system in our combat. And we've put that combo stuff off to one side, but we still have it so that each ability is assigned like this low, middle, high, and special. And so I think we can just use that as our kind of base to start with, because I think slash is low, bash is high, we don't have a middle, and then I'm going to assume defend is set to special. It is. So we should be able to tell what each of the ability types are. Now defend slash parrying an attack is going to be more tricky, but let's start here. So if we look at the damage effect under the hit effect, we have some concept here of combo checking. And this system for our combo would check the combo tracker and see whether or not the ability type of this ability was the correct next type that we were expecting. I think we can reuse this idea, and instead we can have it so that the enemy has some sort of like multiplier that it applies to the stagger power based off of the ability types. So let's go take a look at an enemy, namely the slime. So this had a component combo tracker. All right, sorry, had to sneeze. Okay, so this has the combo tracker. So I want to make a new component in here. And I think I'm just going to start from a scratch with a basic mono behavior. And we're going to call this... Oh, right, we started to make a stagger tracker last time, but we ended up doing it in a different way in which we didn't need that component. But I guess I can repurpose that now, because that's an empty mono behavior. Okay, so delete the one I was just creating. And then inside of this stagger tracker, it's just going to have a function to determine what the Stagger ability type Stagger multiplier is, and this will take a ability type, and then we'll just have a little switch statement in here. Fix the formatting. There we go. And this is going to be based off of low, and we can just have a return, and we will return what the multiplier is. And I think that each enemy should be able to define what it wants its multiplier to be. So low multiplier will be what we return if the ability type is low. And then so on and so forth. We will do that for all the other options. And we'll also return 1.0f if it is not one of these ability types, which shouldn't be possible, but we need to have a fail case. High and special. Could do this with a local variable as well, if we wanted to not have just one as the return, but we could have a default result of one and then return that, but I think this will be okay. All right, so low multiplier, then we need a medium, a high, and special. These things may get renamed at some point, but again, kind of still in this kind of prototype mode. I've been playing around with the Stagger system throughout the past week, and I do like the way this is feeling. I think this direction feels better than combos and some of the other stuff we've tried with combat in the past, but I still don't fully feel like this is 100% it, or at least I'm not willing to say this is the main way I want to go. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to put this inside of the Stagger effects. Stagger ability type check. Ability effect, which is a very long name, but is accurate. Okay, and then in here, why did this one get renamed? Okay, sure. So instead of doing a try get component on the combo tracker, we'll instead try get component on the Stagger tracker. And then the Stagger tracker has the ability Stagger multiplier based off ability type, which will return a float, which will be the Stagger multiplier. And then we need to get the current Stagger power and then multiply it. Did we do something like this last week? I feel like we did. Let's take a look at slash. In here, we have an adjust Stagger power. Yes, this is doing basically what we want. This takes in power. Okay, so this one is applying a multiplier to the power of the ability. This is where we're going to start running into problems, because these names are too similar in a lot of ways. Stagger power versus the ability power. It feels like we need another term for power. But, okay. But regardless of the confusion, we want the same kind of idea, but instead of modifying the power property, we're going to modify the stagger power. So inside of hit effect, let's go find this. Open this up. 1 second, I just realized I do not have the water. I need my water bottle. Okay, returned. So, adjust for stagger power. We're going to take this idea and we're going to make a new version of this. We're going to call this... No, okay, sorry. We're going to take the concept of how this is doing it and we're going to move it into here. So we already have the defender. We don't need to worry about the stagger effect. We're kind of just looking for this 3 lines of code here. So we're going to set the property. Yeah, we're going to get the property component, grab its ID. This will give us the stagger power. I mean, this actually could just be the same component. They're just operating on different properties. Well, no, not really. Because this one's based off of checking the ability type to get the value. Yeah, okay. No, it needs to be its own thing. It's fine. So we'll... set this up basically the same way we had done the stagger power adjuster. I feel like maybe there's something to this that we could have like a more simplistic component that is just like modify a power or modify a property by another property. This feels like a multiply property by property kind of setup that could be more generic, and then these components could just be setting a new property value. It's like this debate about like how generic to make stuff versus how like specialized. It's fine. We're prototyping. We're trying to get through this quickly. I will think about refactoring this if we find the need to. If we find a third situation in which we're taking a property value and multiplying it by essentially what could be another property value, then I'll think about doing a refactor. But for the time being, we'll just move forward with copying and pasting this functionality. And then same idea here. This all gets removed, I think. Do we do anything in here? We don't really. So we're going to set this up the same way. Okay, so stagger ability type check ability effect, which is a nightmare name, in reality is grabbing the defender if the defender has a stagger tracker component, then it's going to check the current ability type to get what that enemy's stagger tracker says the stagger multiplier should be. So if you're doing like a heavy hit, that enemy might have a 1 times multiplier, so it just does its normal amount of stagger. But we could have a different enemy that if you use a heavy hit, then it does more stagger multiplier to that type of enemy. And then that stagger multiplier is going to be multiplied into the stagger power property and then reset to that value. Okay, I think this should just work. So we're going to grab this. We're going to check ability type stagger power. And we're gonna drag this component in here. Drag it up for consistency. Remove this one. And then instead of modifying power, we're going to want to modify the stagger power. Just want to make sure that I'm getting the name of that correctly. This one. We're going to modify this property. And if we don't find... If defender does not equal null, and defender try get component finds it, then we do this. Otherwise, we're just not going to modify the stagger power. Although if we don't have a defender at this point, we're already in a weird case, but still, we're going to leave the components to be as generic as possible. They don't need to worry about that type of situation. They just need to do what they need to do. And I think that's all we need to set up on the ability itself or on the hit effect. Then if we go to the actual slime and we add a new component in here for stagger tracker, this should have 4 properties, which should be defaulted to 1 in all situations, because we should always let the multiplier be the same by default. And then if we want, we could let slash be more powerful. So if we set low multiplier to 2, that means we should fill the bar to like 80 out of 100. So 80% when we do slash now. Oh, something broke. We failed to hook up the property component to the ability effect, is all that is. So in here, when we added this new component, I failed to drag that up into here. Cool. Now it should double the multiplier, or it should double the amount of stagger we do on the slime with slash, but specifically this bigger slime. Yeah, and now that's doing 80. And if we hit the smaller slime, which we did not modify its stagger value, it's still just doing 40. So it takes 3 hits to get it to stagger, although for the small one it dies before stagger really matters. Okay, so I think that's that. For bash and slash, that should be relatively easy now to essentially just add the stagger tracker to those enemies, and then we can just decide how much each type of attack does to it. So slash can be more potent versus slimes and less potent versus the boar, for example. The other part of this, though, which is going to be more tricky, is going to be the parry. Because we can parry enemies if we time our defend to execute at the exact same turn that they would attack. And that also is applying some amount of stagger. Now, how did I do that last week? This is the problem with like doing this as like with like hobby projects, is that only working on it once a week means that it is very easy to forget the literal last thing you did. So when we apply stagger, we get the stagger value and we modify the stagger stat. So if we look here, can we find any other spots where we're doing that? No, this is the only location. So that means that when we do the parry, it must be doing the same thing. That's the right ability. But like defend just applies a status effect for parry. How did I set this up last week? Where did we put this code? Can we just go backwards through what we did? We do have version control, so we could just go through source tree real quick and take a look at where things are at. But I'd prefer to kind of make sure that my brain is at least functioning a little bit today and I'm able to kind of recall. We have the stagger status effect. That's being applied. We can also see the files we've modified. I feel like I'm not seeing it, but I feel like it should be somewhere in the attack state. Here, faux attack state. Is it not? Let's look for parry. Oh, it's here. Right. This is a bit confusing, but makes sense. Right? We do the parry check inside of the enemy's hit effect. So at the base level, every enemy has a hit effect, and it's doing a parry check. And inside of the parry check, it's doing a stagger power, apply stagger. And so we're just applying a stagger power of 20 by default. So same idea here. What's weird is it's not on the defend ability. It's on the enemy realizing its attack has been parried. But that's fine. This logic only happens when the defend ability is used. So we just need to multiply the amount of stagger power, this value 20 that we're kind of hard setting. We need to multiply this by whatever this particular enemy's stagger multiplier is for parry. Okay, so if that's the case, I don't think we can use the same ability effect that we used before, because this is going to be checking against the defender to get its stagger tracker, and then checking against the ability's ability type. But none of that's going to make sense here. So I'm going to have to, again, for the sake of getting it up and running, we're going to just do a very simple special case ability effect, which will be parry, stagger, parry set stagger power ability effect. Again, wordy, but fine and descriptive. And I think we can kind of just replace the hard set 20 here So we'll replace this, and instead of doing this logic on defender, we want to do attacker. Where's a good example of how we do that? This is how we get the attacker. So we're going to get attacker, and then we're going to get the attacker's stagger effect, because this is the enemy attacking, and it's become it has been parried. So it'll get its value, but instead of checking the ability type, we're just going to tell it that this is a parry, which again, we're mixing and matching kind of prototyping mechanic stuff here. So we're going to reuse the combo system's special type. And then once we get that stagger multiplier, we still just get the property and multiply it. Yeah, maybe this is fine. I was thinking that we would replace the hard-coded one, but keeping it in a similar setup is probably better. It's a bit repetitive because you'd only ever get to this state if you were This is a generic that just sets a value. Because this is a special case effect, I suppose we can just do the same thing. So instead of getting the value from here, we could just have the base stagger power value. I guess, the downside of this is that if we ever want to modify it in other ways, this becomes very hard-coded. Okay, I'm going to leave it. I think it's probably fine. So we will now grab that component that we made, and we're going to just leave it the way it is. Where did I put the stagger stuff? Here. So parry, set, stagger, power. We can remove this one. I'm going to remove this. And instead, this is going to just... This is just going to modify it. So we have to hard set it here to 20, and then this one's going to just adjust it on the next step. But that means if we ever wanted to create other components that go in between, we can. And I think I like that flexibility more. Yeah, okay. So this should now make it so that each enemy can have a different amount of stagger that it receives. I think long term, it would be nice if there was some way of having this value come from the attack. But I don't think... We could eventually, actually, because what we can do is we could check the parry status effect on the defender, and if it has the parry status effect could, in theory, have the power of that parry associated with it. The NPCs have it all the time. Where... Oh, this is inflicted through some reflection stuff, right? So if we go look at defend, it inflicts parry to itself for 1 turn on the turn it actually performs the action. But inflict status effect is generic, so it doesn't even know what type of status effect it's creating. It just knows the name of the class it wants to generate and the duration. So having the parry status effect receive any kind of extra information is non-trivial. There is an events and notifications. Okay, it's a rabbit hole. I think it's possible. I would have to spend more time on it, but I think that it is possible for us to eventually have the power of Defend's Stagger come from the actual ability if we pass it into the effect, the status effect, and then the enemy's hit effect could, on parry check, pull the specific parry status effect's power and apply that as a base instead of just having it hard-coded to 20 inside of the hit effect. And then this multiplier would make more sense because it wouldn't just be a hard-coded value, but would be some ever-changing amount. Okay, so I like this setup for eventual future stuff that I just described, so we're going to move on. So this means that if we go into the enemy, IT slime, and we set the special multiplier, which is our parry, to like 10, that means that parry should instantly stagger the enemy. So we're going to hit the enemy to activate it, and then we will defend 3 times. Oh, right. It's going to be hard to tell because the enemy's already staggered. Ooh. Okay. Same bug. We did the same dumb thing. We failed to set up the property. AI hit effect. AI hit effect. In here, we failed to drag this in. Okay, cool. Fun bug. I mean, realistically, I could do like a get component to validate and make sure that that is set, but it's just better to fix it and have it hard-coded. It will be slightly faster in the long run. All right, so it's trying to run. I'm going to just wait out its stun. Okay, so now it's going to attack in 6 turns, 4 turns, 2 turns. Yeah, and that instantly parried the enemy. And then if we go back and change the multiplier back to 1, we should see that it only applies like 20 power. Down here, change this back to 1. Zoom back in. Okay, and now I'm going to hit him with bash because that's going to do less stagger and we can more easily see what's happening. I'm going to just wait a couple of turns through debug. Yeah, and so now the parry's gone back to only doing like 20. Cool. So we have a system in place, again, very prototype, but it is possible for me to change the amount that a specific enemy takes from stagger, or the amount of stagger it takes from an ability. Oh, man, I should write this down. 1 second. Okay, so let's see. Let's take a look at the stagger mechanic sheet. Let's grab some of these boxes. And now I'm just going to write this out for myself. So we now have it so the enemy has a stagger modifier, essentially, in the form of the stagger tracker. So maybe that should be renamed. And then it can do, for each ability type, assuming each ability falls into a category, and like this might eventually become something like elemental attacks or something like that might be the way we go. So like this enemy's weak to fire, so it takes more stagger when you use a fire ability. But for each ability type, there is a set stagger power multiplier. Okay. I guess the next step is figuring out how the boar factors into this. Well, I think I kind of need to see, what does progression look like? When we start the game, we're going to go through multiple rooms. We're going to go through like F8 into F7, G7, G8, and then we'll get a weapon, and we'll get slash, and we'll only have the slash ability. Then we'll move forward and we'll fight our very first mini slime, the little blue one, in H8. And then there's 2 in H7. Currently I have a big green slime in H6. G6 is empty, and then we head down to G7 where we kind of get like an end of the first run cutscene, which I think I'm leaning towards it automatically ending that run. So you'll have, in theory, killed 3 of these slimes. On your first run. And then the following run, you'll have the bash ability, because you'll have picked it up at the end, in that end of first run cutscene. You'll have gained the bash ability, and you'll head into F7, and I think I'm going to tutorialize the stagger concept on that second run, and you'll fight the green slime in F7 that you couldn't fight before. And I will get you to use slash and bash on it, and then you'll head to G7, in which the boar will defeat you, essentially. You will be too weak to fight the boar. And that will partly be because you don't have the defend ability yet, and the boar will be too difficult to stagger, is the idea. Yeah, and even with a good amount of stagger, we can't defeat the boar. Now, the boar is in an infinite staggered state, it looks like, which is interesting. Yeah, the boar eventually got out of stagger. And then looks like it missed us with its attack. Interesting. What is going on with the boar? So there's a bug here with the stagger on the boar specifically. Now, is that because we're missing some component? Okay, it's staggered. I'm going to debug wait 10 turns. And it came out of stagger fine that time. Interesting. Why did it break that first time? Was it because I hit it with another attack while it was in the staggered state? Let's see if we can reproduce it. So we hit it 3 times. It becomes staggered. Yeah, and its bar remained full here. It almost feels like because I hit it 3 times with slash while it was stunned, it like got staggered again. But it shouldn't stack in that way. And why am I not seeing that behavior on the slime? Is it because I've never tested it that way? So if I just keep hitting this and then let it fall out. Oh, it does get into a bad state. I think it's reapplying the stagger effect multiple times. Let's look at the auto status controller. Yes. This doesn't have any concept of preventing you from getting another from applying another status effect while stagger is greater than or equal to max stagger. Oh, that's a funny bug. So we will need to check the sender, get component. In this context, where did this come from? This came on... It should be a stats component, so I guess we can do stats.get component in children, because the status effect should be a child object under the enemy. So we can get the status effect component. I don't like it, but it should fix the bug. Is there a more deterministic way that doesn't require us to fetch a component to determine whether or not the enemy is currently staggered? That's the question. So yeah, if we hit this enemy multiple times... Well, it's not getting staggered at all. Oh, right, because I inverse the logic. It should be if it doesn't find a stagger effect. So if stagger effect is null, then we can apply one. Otherwise, don't. And this should make it so that we only get the single status effect. Yeah, and it cleared properly that time. Okay, so then if we hit this boar, stagger it, and then just keep hitting it. Yeah, okay, it properly gets out of stagger, but because it only has one attack that's way too long right now, because it hasn't been retuned for the stagger prototyping's kind of CT numbers, like the timing of the abilities, It means that we can keep the boar permanently staggered. So we need to find some numbers that make more sense in this world. So if we take a look at the boar, first off, we're going to add a stagger tracker, and we're going to make it so that slash is half as effective versus the boar, but we're going to make it so parry is, let's say, 3 times more effective, because right now we know it's a base of 20, so that'll mean 1 parry will do 60 stagger to the enemy. And if we're halving the amount slash does, right now by base it does 40, that means instead it'll do 20. So if you slash twice and then parry, the boar will become staggered. What if we just let it be 1/1 parry? Because then we could bring down this attack. What is it doing? It's doing ordered attack. It's going to do AI charge into AI smash. AI charge only happens if you're far away from it. Otherwise, AI smash is a 9 CT ability. So if we make it a 5 CT ability, does that line up perfectly so you can slash and then parry to stagger it? Because I think the other thing is, I need to remember that this is the first chapter, and this is your first time dealing with a lot of these enemies. The mechanics don't need to be that complicated. And I can just let the player be rewarded by getting the base concept. Yeah, so here I'd need to defend twice. And then, yeah, it gets parried again. Okay. So if the attack is only 5, then you're always going to be able to line up slash and defend, and you'll basically be able to permanently block the boar from being able to hit you, assuming it's only doing that one ability over and over again. We can maybe add some rotation where it, like, after it becomes staggered, it does something else. Maybe it runs away and then tries to charge you. I'll have to figure that out, but for now, that's probably better. But, now the next thing is that bash is not doing nearly enough damage. So we can get it into a staggered state if we have defend, which again, we won't have defend until we've done some kind of exploration stuff. So the boar will basically be a death sentence if we fight one before we find defend. But once we have it, we can get it pretty consistently parried, but it'll take us a very long time. And if we mess up the timing of our attacks, we can end up in a situation where there's no possible way of defending. Because there we got to 3 and we could get a slash in, but it wouldn't be enough to stun it or to stagger stagger it and therefore keep it from attacking. But defend is 2, so we can't line up the defend either. Because I sometimes skip turns by like hitting a debug button, but the player won't have access to a skip turn button. So in that situation, there's just no way that the player would be able to get that defend. So I think that's good. Like there's spots where if you're just not thinking fully about what's happening, you can get into bad spots still, and I like that. But it's going to take forever to defeat this enemy. How much strength would we need to unlock in order to make this enemy reasonable to defeat? Like, maybe we have to use bash twice? Okay, let's see here. So we're going to parry it. It gets staggered. We're going to use bash twice. That's 23, 23. Then we slash, defend, bash. Okay, you know what? I don't hate that. So if we collect 3 points of strength from the skill trees, 1, 2. Oh, actually, these ones are 1 point of strength. This one's actually increased by 2. So it's 4 points of strength. If we get 4 points of strength, then we can slash parry to stagger the boar. Then we can bash twice, then slash parry, stagger the boar, and then bash twice. Otherwise, if we don't have those 4 points of strength from the skill grid system, it'll just take forever to kill the boar. We could do it, but it would just take a really long time. Okay, I don't think that's bad. I don't think that's bad at all. There's other ways that we could also do this as well. So we can have ability skill nodes on bash that would increase the power. Yeah, so this one actually has a power increase that makes the bash ability go from 15 to 30, which is essentially doubling its damage. What does that look like? So rather than doing strength increases, we could have a power increase, or a variety. We could have multiples. Let's come in here. If we get the power increase, and only the power increase, how do we line up versus the boar now? Oh, interesting. Only 7 and 8. That's what we were doing before. So that power increase didn't do anything. Let's take a look at what power is being sent in. Zero. So it found an ability improvement on the ability. Oh. This only happens on load. That's fine. So it only sets the power. It only sets the power when we load the dungeon rooms. But you'll never be able to upgrade a skill, currently at least, you'll never be able to upgrade a skill from an area where you could be in combat. So this is fine. You always upgrade in the Goddess Realm and then come down to fight enemies. So you'll always be on a fresh load when you enter that room. So, okay. So it's just in this kind of debug center where we're going to run into this issue where after we upgrade our abilities, we'll need to exit and reload this space in order for it to take effect. Okay, so now if we hit the enemy, yeah, and because we went from 15 power to 30 power, it essentially just doubles the amount of damage we're doing. So then we can do 2 bashes, and then slash defend again, and then 2 more. So if we get plus 15 power, doubling our damage, that's going to give us a 3 cycle to kill the boar. But I would imagine any points of strength we get are going to be way more impactful. So if we get 1 point of strength here and then come up here and spawn the boar again, we should see a major difference. Alphabetical player in Twitch chat asking or saying, I'm making my first project in C#, a basic top-down game, and I don't know how to tile map, so I use a PNG for the background and set the collision myself. How do you change layers? I sadly do not know. I'm actually doing... I gave up on tile map a long time ago and ended up just doing stuff in 3D for a couple of graphical reasons. So I do not have an answer to your question. I'm sorry. Okay, so 1 point of strength basically increased our damage by like 5 points. Whereas before it was increasing it by like 2 or 3. I hope you find your answer though. So I use a PNG for the background and set the collision myself. How do I change layers? Yeah, it just doesn't. It just doesn't make any sense to me without having looked at tile maps in a while. Okay, so 1 point of strength is now way more powerful. How does this compare? Sorry, let's see. So if we now hit the enemy with bash directly, we're only doing 10. Okay, and so it's because of the stagger multiplier that we're doing the big chunks of 20, because we're doubling the amount of damage. Is that right? When we hit this enemy, it does 8. And then when we stagger it, yeah, we do 18. So with plus or minus on like a 10% damage variation we have built in, yeah, essentially we have it set to be doubled. Yeah. I remember now. So this was a 100% increase. So yeah, bash is doing 100% more damage when the enemy is staggered. I guess the next problem we need to dig into then, because I'm not minding these numbers. The boar is obliterating us, which is maybe a bit brutal. Like it essentially one-shots us if we mess up even one turn and let it get an attack in. So I feel like its attack stat could probably be brought way down. Yeah, it has an attack of 14 and a defense of 18. So we bring up this sheet again, which we have not done yet today. But if we... Okay, so it has an attack of 14, ability power of 25. We have defense of 7. So yeah, it's doing 174. But if we got a few points of defense, it's still going to do way too much damage to us. So if we brought that back down to like 10, it would still be one-shotting us. But each point of defense is like taking 10 points of damage off. And here it's still taking off more, obviously. But it's still nowhere near... Like, we'd need to get so much defense to actually be able to even sustain one hit. We start with 55 health. Yeah, maybe this isn't bad, actually. Bringing it down Bringing it down to 10 means it's still one-shotting us, but if we get a couple points of defense and a couple points of health, we'd be able to take a single hit. Okay, sure. So we're going to bring its attack down to 10. I'm also curious if we defend, that means we would be able to take, yeah, a single hit. So if we mess up but we defend, we can also take a single hit with this at 10 as its attack value. So yeah, I like these values more. So the next thing we need to do is we need to start building skill trees, I think. I think we need to start working on actually building something out here, because we kind of threw some placeholder nodes in here a long time ago, and we just haven't really modified this because I wasn't really happy with where combat was. But this prototype is actually the one where I'm starting to feel like this could be it. This could be the direction we go. And if it is, then I think it's finally time to take a pass at these skill trees and make some decisions about when I'm giving out what stats and how much and how frequently. Okay. Okay. Takes 3 hits to kill that enemy. If we get a single point of strength. It very quickly goes to 2 hits. And I believe I've tuned my damage formula and my numbers for that to be the case, because I want it to feel like immediately impactful when you get like a skill node unlocked. Like if you get one single skill node, you're like, wow, I went from 2 to 3, like, or from 3 hits to 2 hits. Like, even if a player doesn't know those numbers, the hope is that there's this like kind of visceral, like, I feel stronger. So then the problem I'm running into is I think that I want you to be able to come back here and buy more than one node at a time. But if you get too many strength nodes too quickly, you're going to become overpowered. What do we have that we can fill in for our nodes? We were looking at Final Fantasy X for reference on how it does its skill node stuff, and we kind of had written out some reference for the different items that it uses. If we look at our system, what are the different types of nodes we can do? I guess realistically, these stack crystals are a base for the types of upgrades we can have. We have, currently at least, strength, defense, and HP. Eventually, we will have magic defense, and I'm hoping luck and a few other stats. We now also have Stagger Power and Damage Multiplier as 2 more types of nodes that we can have. Specific to the ability, we also have the power of that ability, so how much damage it does. Fallon in Twitch chat asks why did you go with the skill tree model? Are you planning on let the player build into archetypes, or is it following a roguelike convention? Mostly. Okay, so we're not gonna do the roguelike convention. I'll start there. The idea is that as you do each run, you will get stronger, but the maps are fixed. There's a set layout, and the enemy placements are fixed. So I'm not planning on having conventions. I've thought about it, but I've decided against having stuff like this run. You get to choose that Slash does +5 power or something. I just want it to be more consistent than that, and have like a set kind of flow. In terms of players building archetypes, that's my eventual hope. I'm honestly struggling a little bit to like figure out how to build something that flexible while also not making it so that it's immediately broken. Trying to balance the multiple archetypes is going to be tricky, but I think that's the intent, is that I'd like to have it so that when a player comes in, they can decide whether or not they're going to spend their currencies or their level ups on specific paths. And might decide, oh, I really want to get more stagger power on my Slash so that I can stun these slimes more easily. Or I might want bash multiplier, stagger multiplier, which I'm going to have to find a better player facing term for that. But they might choose to upgrade on bash the multiplier when the enemy is staggered because they want to be able to kill the enemy more quickly. Eventually, there's also a question of like, is there elemental effects, which is something me and Trixie have been talking a lot about, is like, how does elemental stuff fit into this, which is a classic kind of JRPG kind of trope. And there might be some aspect of that as well, like maybe players can upgrade their Slash to have a fire attribute to it or an ice attribute, and they can kind of toggle which one it has, and certain enemies might be weak to certain attributes or resistant to certain attributes. But I'm not willing to put that down here yet. But the short version is I'm planning to let players kind of build out their own kind of path through the progression, while also kind of making it somewhat fixed. Again, there's a reason Final Fantasy X Sphere Grid is a great example, because for the most part, your characters are locked in. When you get into the Expert Grid, you can kind of choose to go other paths, but if you choose to go off the main path, you really need to know what you're doing, or you can just end up getting in a bad position where your characters are going to be really weak for a long time. And so, like, I think that's the kind of idea, is that there will be a core path that I expect players to play through, but there may be some niche directions you can go on the skill trees in order to potentially get a little bit more overpowered. Again, balancing that's going to be a nightmare, but that's, I don't know why I want to do that to myself for some reason. Hopefully that answers the question somewhat. But there is no resetting. There is no your character gets weak and you have to start over again type mechanic. It is just consistently becoming stronger as you play through the experience. I don't think we have anything else right now that we can add. At least not currently. I want more types of upgrade nodes. But for the time being, this is what we got. So for our first few abilities that won't be magic based, I think strength, defense, HP, power, damage multiplier, and ability power are going to be kind of what we got to work with. Do you have a follow-up question, Fallen? Like, it feels like there's a follow-up question. Or do you want to dig deeper on it? I'm down to dig deeper. Okay, so I think I need to add damage multiplier to the ability spec in the same way that I added stagger power. And everywhere where we're modifying stagger power, we also need to be modifying stagger damage multiplier. Because we're going to want to be able to bring this information down from the ability and have it be modifiable from our skill tree. So I think that's going to be our first step here, is in order to make those new nodes work, we're going to need to be able to actually have this be modifiable. Okay, and then this gets used here. This comes from the design data, so we're going to have to modify the design data to give us the stagger power as well, or stagger damage multiplier. I'm going to have to come up with like a fancy keyword for this, which is going to be like punch or something. Like some keyword for this damage increase. Okay, so that should be fine there. That'll come in. We'll have to actually modify our design data to have that information. We can do that in a moment. This is going to come down into the ability improvement. And where does this go? This goes into here. We're going to want to similarly pass in a new property, which is going to be the stagger damage multiplier. And we're going to make that the same name. Okay. Perfect. So then inside of our abilities, we're going to need to modify them. So if we go look at bash, in here, we're setting this value to 100 by default. And it was called Staggered Power Multiplier. Is that the same name? I feel like it's not. Fine, I will... No, I'm gonna go with this new name. I think I like this one more. Which means we're gonna have to modify wherever it was getting used. Here. And we will apply that to hit effect. Just going to double check to make sure that apply went through. Can't see why it wouldn't. Okay, so that's now there. So then Bash should be able to get its default value removed, and we shouldn't need this game object here anymore once we have set up the design data. So let's quickly go into here. We're going to add a new column to the right, which will be stagger damage multiplier. Let's move it here, I guess. And then these will be in percentages, essentially. Actually, that might mess up our TSVs, but I'm going to try it. Fallon Twitch chat has the follow-up. The follow-up is why you want to go through the major lift of a skill tree opposed to a classic level-up system when this is a linear design. If it is because the skill trees are cool and fun, that's more than understandable. I love the sphere grid system. Or if it is so, then you don't have to partition things like elemental damage, skill upgrades into their own subsystems. That also sounds really cool to me. Parsing, sorry, 1 second. I don't quite understand the last part. I think I'm misreading it somehow, but my brain is not clicking. But I think the reason, I'll say for the why a skill tree system as opposed to a classic level up, I think a big part of it is because I want items in the world. There's kind of this weird catch-22 thing that I'm running into. Or not catch-22, I don't know what the right metaphor or analogy would be, but the problem that I'm running into is that I don't have anything to give out. One thing I did very early on was I made this decision that I wouldn't have equipment like items and weapons because I didn't want to have to deal with all the menus associated with modifying that stuff. In no small part because you have a single character. And I feel like equipments, swords, axes, like weapon choice, all of that stuff becomes more interesting when you have a team that you're kind of choosing where to put those pieces of equipment, and potentially you're choosing to downgrade or upgrade a specific character, but then you can take that hand-me-down armor and give it to a different character. So there's like something more fundamentally visceral about having a equipment system with a team versus having a single character RPG. So I don't want to have equipments and swords was my thinking. So instead, all of our upgrading and stuff is being handled through the skill tree system. And I'm doing it through the skill tree rather than a direct level up, simply because I want to have something similar to Final Fantasy X's Sphere Grid, where there are items required along with experience on the ability itself, in order to give me something to give the player in the world. So when we defeat this little slime, it will occasionally drop different items, and those items are then useful for upgrading inside of here. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of other systems I could build instead that could have like a crafting system that has some sort of global upgrading that is unrelated to a skill tree. But I kind of have built a lot of these infrastructure systems a long time ago, and it's easier to just use these ones than to, you know, build like a crafting system or something from the ground up. I think there is a real question that I do ask myself quite a lot, which is that, is it worth it to have all this hassle of a skill grid design, like designing a whole skill grid system and balancing like pathing and noding, and like even displaying this information is something that Drixie is still actively working on concepts all the time. And I'm just like, I don't think that's it. But I think she's getting closer, but it's still not an easy thing to visualize, like a skill tree, for example. So there's a lot of problems with it, but I have all of the infrastructure built for it. The core engine is built around this kind of system. And so it just kind of seems easier to keep using it than to reinvent the wheel. And maybe that's a little bit of the, you know, sunk cost fallacy, at least in no small part. But I think there is also, I will say, a little bit of a, it's just cool. I also fundamentally really like this idea that I have, which is that the abilities themselves have the skill tree. So the more you use Bash, the more points you get for upgrading Bash. The more you use Slash, the more points you get for upgrading Slash's skill tree. The fact that each skill tree has its own like section feels interesting, and I kind of just like that idea and seeing where that design goes. So there's a kind of a little bit of a, I'd like to just see how this works, that is also a part of it as well. So cool and interesting, but also like just the design itself is fascinating to explore. And at some point, that's a big part of building the game for me, is just finding parts of it fascinating. Bit rambly. It's my thing. I've always been a bit rambly, but hopefully that came across okay. Mostly it's cool and fun, but also there's some element of I want to have some sort of item progression or pickups or drops that enemies can give you. Fallon in Twitch chat saying that makes a lot of sense. That way you can partition a section of the trees based off where the player is in the game. When you have base drops that act as experience for kind of nodes, and locking off branches or further progression along the main tree with things like key spheres as main or side quest rewards. Yeah, as well as potentially even just the abilities themselves. Like when you first start, you don't have Bash, and you have to play through the run to the point where you actually get to this interactable and unlock that ability. But once you've unlocked that ability, then you can go into Bash's skill tree. So the abilities themselves act as gating systems. So once you've unlocked a new ability, you've also unlocked a new skill tree. So you've both unlocked a gameplay element and a progression system, which, and you can't just like dump everything, all your items that you've collected into that ability you've just gotten. You have to go use that ability and level it up in order to be able to upgrade its skill tree. So you might have the right kind of requisite items banked in your inventory, and I do expect that the way this should be balanced is you always have a ton of these things. Like if you think about like potions in a Final Fantasy game, you never run out and you're always finding them, but it's always nice when you find it, even if you have a bunch of them. And I think these will end up having a similar kind of vibe. You will be often given more than you need, but finding them will still be useful because you're always using them. But you should never be running out. Like, I don't think, again, Final Fantasy X Sphere Grid is a really good reference for this. You rarely run out of mana and power spheres once you get a little bit into the game. Like, after, you know, a couple hours, maybe several hours, these become basically an infinite resource, and they're kind of capped near the end of the game all the time. And in a similar way, though, it's, you know, when you see them come up in the, you know, end of screen upgrade screen, you're not mad that you're getting more than you need. So I think there's something interesting to that. Yeah, I'm really liking this stagger system. It feels like it's making combat way more interesting. And I can also see that, like, once we eventually get to the point where, like, I'm saying that this is an infinite loop you can have the boar stuck in, and that's bad because, like, I don't want the player to just be able to do the same thing over and over again. But it should be relatively straightforward to just have the boar occasionally throw in a different ability, and that ability makes you go, oh, okay, I can't just slash and defend again. I'm gonna have to do something else. And sometimes that something else will get you killed. Okay, cool. Where were we? I was setting up the damage formulas. So we were in here, and I was adding these values. So I'm going to give Bash 100% multiplier. What was it actually? What did I tune it to? If we go to slash... We set it to 40, so it was a 40% increase. And then shoot, we can leave at something like, I don't know, 50, 60, 70, something random, because we're not even using shoot. That'll probably be a chapter 2 thing. That's the other thing that I'm not really mentioning, but the anticipation is that I'm going to break the game up into, like, multiple chapters. So everything we're looking at right now is all chapter 1, and you'll have to sum up and complete all the goals for that chapter, and then you'll move on to chapter 2. Think Final Fantasy VII Remake, the way that it kind of breaks up its game structure into sections. I think that that's probably going to make my life easier for trying to build such a massive RPG experience in a, like, because originally I was thinking it would be like a big open world where you could go into any zone at any time, and I just realized that was going to just create more and more work as the game went on. So I'm trying to break them up into essentially chapter-based areas. And the bow ability is probably going to be something you unlock in chapter 2. I think we probably will be able to get away with just slash, bash, and defend as, like, chapter 1. And it'll kind of teach you the basics of stagger and the kind of core combat gameplay, I think, as well as upgrading. Okay, so now we need to go into the ability parser for infinite retries. And we've added this next one to the end of the list. So this will be element 7 in our TSV. Damage multiplier. That should be all we need to do there. I just need to download this. So we'll see how this TSV looks. Gonna download this TSV. Game data abilities. Do we have that up in VS Code? We had the JSON file up. Let me get the TSV up. So ability. That's the design data. Fine, I'll find it manually. All right, should be somewhere down here. This is the JSON files. Where is our TSV folder? There it is. So if we drag that into here and then drag it over, yeah, we're getting the percent symbols. Okay, that's unfortunate. It would be nice visually to be able to see the percent signals, percent signs here, but I'm not gonna mess with that. These will just be. Oh, can I not? Can I just go back to numbers, please? Thank you. No, I want them to be whole numbers. And I want you to get rid of these decimal places, please. Sure. Better. Okay, those are updated. So then if we come up into our tools, parsers, ability parser, and then we go back into here, we can look at our JSON file. And our JSON file should now have a multiplier associated with it. Let's actually look at some of the ones we're using. Move and defender 0, shoot has 80, bash has 100, and slash has 40. So now we should, in theory, be able to delete this one, as well as in bash delete this hard-coded value, and it should import? I don't know. I can't think of the right word I'm looking for right now, but it should get the value from the design data. We do have an error. Oh, right. We've been hard coding a fix in here for another thing that I've been prototyping, and it is incorrect. 4 is too large. Okay, 1 second, stand by. We are going to have to go into source tree real quick. And I'm going to do that off camera, off to one side real fast, but I'm going to need to figure out what it is that I've modified and undo it by importing. Okay. It's just the way that I have this. I need to fix it, is what I need to do. But we made a modification to have move be a ability. Yeah, and we have still got it broken. And that is because that new move ability we have in here is set to 4, which is too large. So we need to make it 2 because it's taking the place of shoot for prototyping purposes right now. Does that fix the errors? It does. Okay, and can I open the screen and it doesn't break? Good. Perfect. Yeah, so basically I'm trying this idea where like when combat starts, the move is like locked in and you can't like move at all. So like if I hit the normal movement buttons I had been using to move, now it just changes my player's facing. And then I thought I might want to have an actual like move button, which maybe becomes like dodge or something, that allows the player to essentially, you know, maybe we do a different animation. So instead of a walk, the player like hops to one side to kind of indicate that when you're in combat, you can't just move around. It's too dangerous to just move. Whatever narrative purpose or spin I want to put on it. But for gameplay purposes, having you be able to move is just, it kind of breaks everything for me. So having it be this locked in, you're dueling the enemy and you have to be very careful about your abilities makes more sense. But the way that I've added move is a bit of a hack. And every time we re-import the design data, I'm breaking some hard-coded values, and I had to look at source tree to try and remember what I had done. Okay, so now we should see that everything still works the same. If I hit this enemy, when it is staggered, we should do a little bit more damage with that, and we should do about double damage with that one. Same thing here. Yeah, which is 8 is about double. Well, maybe it's not. Did that not work versus this enemy? Yeah, it looks like the damage multiplier isn't applying to the boar. But it looked like it was being applied to the slime. Interesting. I suppose the easiest thing to do would be to actually validate through debugging to see what's happening. So if we come into here and we look at the ability improvements. Nope. Where's our Stagger folder? Here. If we look at Stagger Power Adjuster, this is where we're going to get the power increase ID. And if we stun the enemy and then use bash, helps if we actually attach to Unity, then we can see what value we're getting here. So getting the property, it found the value. Oh no, it didn't find it. It did not find Stagger Damage Multiplier. Interesting. Let's go back to ability. It should be setting that for us here. Is that the same name? Stagger Damage Multiplier. Did we make a mistake with our copy and paste? Stagger Damage Multiplier. That looks the same. We're going to do a quick copy. Go back to where we were. Yeah, I'm not seeing any difference there. So that should be the right ID. So then we'll go a different route. If we come into here, interesting. The damage multiplier for the bash ability is 0. So it did not get the information here. This feels like something is wrong with our design data, but we can see, I know I messed with some stuff off camera, but like this is still 100. So that should still be correct. Okay, so then I guess the next question is the ability spec not set up correctly? It should be getting the information from the design data, which is here. So let's check this part. We're going to hit stop. We're going to get out of the current debug state, and then we're going to hit stop. And then when we restart, we should see that it reads in the design data, and for bash, it should be at 100. Yeah, there's 100, and it's setting that value. Okay, so then if we look at where it gets applied to the ability improvement here, we should see that as well. Why did we not hit this? Oh, there's 2 spots. Yeah, I knew that. I feel like we ran into the same thing last week when we were setting up the stagger power. Both spawn ability, so like basically there's a spawn ability when we start the map, and then there's a spawn ability in player's inventory midway through a map, which is when you pick up the sword from the ground, we give you slash. And those two different functions basically do identical setups, kind of. There's like a one fundamental difference between them. But I copy and pasted, and I should have made a base function that they both use, because we're running into this problem where if I forget to modify both, we get into a bad state. That looks to be working correctly. I'm going to hit stop. I'm seeing the values come in. Okay. So then if we slash... I should have defended. Slash, and then parry. Yeah, that's doing 30 now. Okay. And then versus this enemy, 3. Parry. That's doing 17. Okay. And if I hit normally, it does 8. Okay, cool. So we now have the stagger damage multiplier coming in from our design data instead of being hard-coded in the abilities themselves. This means that it can also be modified by our skill tree system. So we have this concept of a ability improvement node. This is a type of skill tree node that is going to modify the ability itself. Currently, it can only modify the power. I think that I want to have this be able to modify anything related to the ability, and each of them, all of this will share the same icon. It's possible I might want to make different node components for, like, if this is a stagger power increase versus an ability power increase versus a stagger damage multiplier. They may want to be different nodes, but for today's purposes, we will just have ability improvement type, and we'll just use this one component. And we want power, stagger power, and stagger damage multiplier. Now, in here, we will make a switch statement. And this switch statement will check the value of the ability improvement type. Case. And then this will be power, and it will do the same thing it used to do. And then we need 2 more cases. One for stagger power and one for stagger damage multiplier. And they should basically do the same thing. Perfect. So now we should be able to have a node that can either modify power, or stagger damage multiplier. The major difference, I think, is this now needs some more logic for what description to give. If we look at a stat node, it overrides the description. Okay, I kind of see how some of this stuff is set up, but that's fine. I'm going to ignore how this one is being done, or how stat node is doing it, and we're going to do it the way I think I want to do it here, which is going to be more direct. Instead of doing a get icon description, which is apparently inside of node, which I don't know why it's done that way, I'm going to instead probably just do a switch statement in here. I'm sure I'll figure out why I've done it this other way, but eventually I'll figure it out. That should be good enough for now. And if we wanted to, we could have them have different icons through this setup as well. Sometimes it's just style choice. It all just works. It's just a question of what stylistically you want to do with your code. And I'm not super happy about that, but I'm also not super upset, and so we're just going to move on. Let's go into the skill menu, and then in here we have our skill tree editor. So let's go into slash, and actually we want to do the slash ability load ability. Okay. And this has loaded up our different nodes. So if we wanted to, we could change this health increase to instead be a ability improvement node. It won't care about the stat value. It'll have a cost still. It'll still have an amount. Okay. Interesting. How does this ability node data get used? It has a description inside of it as well. Oh, and it sets the node's description. So when we were modifying the ability improvement node, that was its constructor. But technically the node has already set the description for us, but it's unable to insert the value directly. Okay, I think this is still fine, but realistically we could have also just written like increase stagger by whatever, but this will be... Oh, this data also will need to have the ability improvement type in here now. Because this information needs to be passed in. Where does stat type get passed in? Here. And this is a type of node? I see. Okay. I see. This needs to be at this level. I don't like the way this is set up. Coming back to the skill tree system for the first time in a while, I don't know if I'm sold on this implementation. I feel like... It's a little weird that we have this root node, which basically needs to have all the information about all of the subnodes in it. There's something about the encapsulation here that's not working. And the fact that this node data needs every piece of information for every different type of node we might need also feels a bit odd, and it's only going to use the appropriate dropdowns in this situation where it's actually choosing that type. Okay, so there's something odd here. I'd need to take a much deeper look into it to decide whether or not, or how I'd want to refactor it. I still think we're fine. So we can just set this to power, and then that would allow this to be a power node, and it would increase the power by amount of 5. And then if we do a regenerate node list or update nodes, that did not work. Regenerate node list, update nodes, that worked. Okay. So regenerate node list is getting the references inside of this class to be correct again. And this is now updated to the correct name of increase power by 5. Okay. So then if we come into this strength node here, and we change this dropdown from stat node to ability improvement of stagger power, and we make it amount of 10, and then we again come in here, hit update nodes, and then we save ability data. That should update it in game so that this node will give us power and this node will increase the amount of stagger that we do. And we should see that the slimes go from... we still have the slime with a multiplier on slash. Let's fix that. So now slash does 40 and they need 100, so it takes 3 slashes by default. But if we upgrade that node, we should see that our power on slash goes up by 10, and we should only need 2 hits. So we're going to validate first. Just going to let the enemy hit me, and then we'll hit it one more time. Okay, so yeah, so 3 hits gets it to stagger. Then we're going to come over here. We're going to go into slash. We're going to debug unlock. We're going to increase power. We see that power did still get increased here. And then we're going to come into stagger power, and we're going to increase that by 10. So now if we respawn this boar over here, we should see it stagger in 2. And we do not. This is the same problem we ran into earlier. Technically, we need to reload the map in order for the ability improvements to take, because ability improvements only load on map load, because I never anticipate players to be able to modify their stuff outside of the Goddess Realm, which has no combat. Oh, I also did a dumb. I spawned 2 of these slimes at the same time. We're gonna reload. I just autopilot walked up and spawned a slime, even though there was already one down. Okay, so now we should see that it goes 50%, 100% stagger. And then if we come in here, we don't have any way of indicating that, so we'll want to add this somewhere in the UI to show you what your current stagger power is. Last thing I want to do real quick is I want to see about adding to the damage multiplier, just to validate, even though it should be exactly the same, but just validate that it is doing this. Validate that it works. That's what I'm trying to say. So if we come in here and change the speed node, so we'll go into this one, we'll change its data from a stat node to an ability improvement. We're going to change it to damage multiplier. This will be an increase, so it's going to add to the value, but the values are in hundreds, basically. So if we add an amount of 100, then that will be, it'll go from a standard... Oh, what's slash by default? Slash by default is 40. So if we do like 160, it means that it should do 3 times more damage. I don't like the amount of math that I have to do in order to modify that. That feels bad. I might want to drop that out of the 100 place modifications. Oh, we never actually updated the data. Yeah, kept all that, but I didn't actually hit update. So we are going to validate that that's working for generate, update. We see the nodes have updated, and then we're going to save the ability data. And normally when we hit a slime, we're doing about 6 damage. Oh, I guess technically I need to validate this by hitting the slime here. Yeah, so we're doing 7 or 8 damage. But if we then upgrade our stagger damage multiplier by 160, oh, by getting to that damage multiplier, we have increased our damage to the point where we end up killing the enemy. That's fine. We can parry the enemy to get it to be staggered. Should be able to get 1 hit in. Oh, we're off. Yeah, I couldn't line it up. Okay, there we go. Parried. Good. And then we can do slash. Yeah, and we see we go up to 21. Does that work out right? We're doing 3 times as much damage, so we went from doing like 6 and 7 to 21. Yeah, so that works out. The math makes sense. Hello, CeeLo in Twitch chat. Question, are trying to imitate the DS game art style? Maybe a little bit. The original intent was to do something in the kind of Final Fantasy Tactics PlayStation 1 kind of look. But I feel like over time we've went to this like 640 by 360 kind of resolution, and that's felt maybe more DS. I'm not entirely sure, but I do feel like that GBA DS era of PlayStation 1, like that specific period of pixel art time, is when I'm like what me and my wife Drixie are aiming for. Drixie does all the art. Oh, pseudo 3D. Yeah, it's all billboarded, essentially. And then just, I've done a lot of work in Unity in order to get it to snap to a pixel grid. And further refinement, the question is specifically about the characters. And the characters, yeah, so in order to kind of base build them, we built 3D models in Blender, and then animated those 3D models, and then do a bit of composite rendering to bring them down to, I can't remember exactly, but something in the range of like 48 by 32 or 32 by 48 pixels or something. Drixie is planning on doing a pass and just using a lot of the frames of animation as a silhouette reference, and just kind of painting pixels within the lines. But that cleanup pass we just haven't done yet. So they still have a little bit of blurriness as they kind of move and their pixels shift, but we plan to clean that up. So it yes, pseudo 3D look, but will eventually be kind of removed. Oh, it was more common in the DS than PlayStation because of file sizes and whatnot. That's why I ask. Yeah, no, I did not realize that, but yeah. But we are essentially doing a similar technique, mostly because like the animation silhouette stuff with pixel art is kind of tricky. Trixie only started doing art for this project like 3 or 4 years ago. I guess almost 5 now, because we started doing stuff in 2020. But it's been definitely wasn't something she was familiar with, so. We are at time though. We stream Sundays from 2 to 4, and then I take a break for 2 hours for dinner, and then I come back from 6 to 8. I think we made some good progress. We've got the stagger meter system set up so that we can have different enemies react to different abilities we can have different enemies be staggered by different amounts based off of the ability you're doing. So the boar will get much more stagger power from a parry. Meanwhile, a slime will not get as much stagger. This means that we can more easily stagger a boar by timing our parry attacks. So that's set up. And then we've also just hooked up the ability stagger power, and the ability damage multiplier to be nodes that we can modify on our skill tree. So that's kind of where we're at. We'll come back in 2 hours, like I said. And I don't know what I'm doing from here. I think it's continuing to balance, maybe. I'm not sure if there's any more technical codey stuff that we need to do right now with this prototype for the stagger meter. It might be time to kind of just start putting some of these characters in our maps and maybe do some kind of simple run-throughs and see how the damage numbers are feeling, and see like when we fight this first slime versus when we fight the lighter 2 slimes, how things are starting to kind of play out. I don't know. I'm gonna give it some thought over dinner though, and try and figure out what next steps are. I'll be back in 2 hours, as always, every Sunday. We're slowly making progress on this hobby project. For now though, this is gonna be Tolhi signing out. Later, folks.